Are we set to go?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the final day of the Transportation Air Quality and Health Symposium. We've had a number of excellent keynote speakers and breakout sessions. I'm Katie Turnbull with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, TTI, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session on policymaking and partnerships for transportation and health. We have 4 excellent speakers this morning, and we'll follow the pattern of some of the other breakout sessions. We've asked each presenter to keep their comments to about 15 minutes. We'll have time for questions immediately after each presentation, and then we should have time at the end too for some final questions or comments from both the audience and from the speakers. Please feel free to use the chat box to enter your questions. I'll be monitoring it and using those to ask the speakers the questions. Our first presentation and our first presenter is Joseph Jakuta. He's the Senior Air Quality Planner with the District of Columbia Department of Energy and Environment, and he will be talking about the development of a fuel economy-based vehicle excise tax in the District of Columbia. Joseph.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate you all having me today, and I hope the weather's good where you all are. We're actually forecast to have our first ozone exceedance of the year today, plus our city is being stormed by giant cicadas. But today I wanted to talk to you all about some work we did actually more like 2 years ago, because I was supposed to present this at the before things happened, on the development of a fuel economy-based vehicle excise tax. So I wanted to talk first a little bit about the history of how we wound up putting together. Can you hear me okay? I heard background noise. Okay. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the history, also the data analysis we did, and then describe the conclusions we came up with. And you might be wondering why there's Lamborghini on this slide. And that is because this Lamborghini, well, not this one particularly, but has thrown off our data analysis quite considerably, having a car that cost over $200,000 and gets 4 miles to the gallon. So where we were at when we started this work, we had an excise tax that was based strictly on vehicle weight. We had 3 weight bins, as described in the slide, and they each had 6%, 7%, and 8% tax rates, respectively, and that was multiplied by the fair market value of the car. This whole program's run out of our DMV. And yeah, they essentially assess it on nearly every time a title is transferred, in either through a new vehicle purchase, a used vehicle purchase, etc. And the old excise tax also had an exemption for vehicles that got 40 miles or more to the gallon. But that all changed come December 2018. Our district council passed what they called the Clean Energy Omnibus Act. And one of the titles in this act required that the vehicle excise tax, I don't think that's okay. So yeah, the vehicle excise tax would be based upon fuel economy. The adjustments were supposed to be revenue neutral in the original legislation, but that was later amendment with some technical corrections to give it, and I'll discuss that later. Hybrids were no longer exempted, and we also had an exemption for people that were eligible for EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit. That got signed into law January 2019 after the congressional review period was over. In March of 2019, we were able to get started. We finally issued our DMV issued the final rulemaking in January of 2021. To begin our work, we just started to sort through our registration data. We did have some interesting results and some problems. You might be seeing, well, why is this distribution all on the one side of the screen? That's because there's just a handful of vehicles that are getting really decent fuel economy, like up to 120 miles per gallon with your plug-in hybrids. But you know, most everything's in this normal distribution, median of 22 miles per gallon, mean 22.9. We're hoping this policy will move that those numbers to the right. And we will talk a little bit about the challenges in assessing whether that will happen later. And yeah, so we started by looking through all this data. Now, one other problem, though, is that we weren't collecting fuel economy data. So we had to do a Vinda code on all of this to get the information. We're only successful at getting about half of the vehicles in our registration database. So, but we did examine some other fields, and we think that the vehicles that we don't have the fuel economy data for are similar enough to the vehicles we do have it for us that we can make assumptions. We then went to come up with a new formula. We looked at two different possibilities. One was sort of a linear formula that was that involved the inverse of the fuel economy, and the other was a squared formula. Obviously we're dividing by MPG because you're really trying to get the gallons, not the miles. And we have some examples of how the formulas would be calculated. And we also examined two other things, whether we should bin the, rather than having every single mile per gallon value have its own tax rate, we would have just 5 classifications based upon, and I'll show you the bins later. And then we also debated whether we should maintain those weight class differentials from the original schedule. And then after this, we kind of weighed some of the pluses and minuses of each of the different possibilities. Using a linear formula is more straightforward for the public to understand. So that was one positive of that. But on the other hand, we found later that the least fuel efficient vehicles were not, they were treated rather kindly by a linear formula. The bins also make the whole policy more simple to understand for the public and easier to implement, but they are also somewhat arbitrary. So we were concerned a little bit about that. But in the end, we realized we have to balance the legislative intent, the ease of implementation, and desired policy outcomes while adhering to the strict letter of the law. And as a result, then we want to look at the numbers. So this is how we wound up with these 8 different scenarios, whether they were binned or not, whether they included the weight classes or not, and whether they were based on the linear or the squared formulas. And this is the estimated taxes that would be paid under a new, the differences in taxes paid under the new policy. These are all based upon a revenue neutral scenario. Most of our work was done under that scenario since the amendment came much later in the process. And we found that, yeah, it was definitely disconcerting to see that the 40 mile per gallon vehicles would be paying way more of an increase than the lower MPGs if we went with a linear formula. So that made us really push towards the squared formula. We also, I mean, that's probably the big takeaway from this particular slide. And yeah, in the middle though, they get a lot more of a benefit out of the square formula because everything is getting pushed to that left side of the distribution when we went with that type of formula. Tax rates, the same sort of pattern held up here, that the tax rates were just really low percentage-wise if you were trying, or the changes in the tax rates were just really low percentage-wise if you were trying to look at those. And so between these two data points, or these two examinations of the data, we definitely were leaning towards using a squared formula. And finally, this is how it winds up looking as far as the sort of the estimated taxes any particular vehicle will pay. Obviously, it's based upon the fair market value. So if you're buying a $10,000 car versus a $30,000 car, the $30,000 car is going to cost more in the taxes. But on average, it's only about $100 for a 40 mile per gallon vehicle under the new policy, which isn't too bad. But then when you're starting to get into the lower ends, especially the less than 21 mile per gallons, you're paying almost $1,000 on average to register that new car. And we will see how this impacts persons purchasing cars with them. But the challenges we faced, well, I mentioned earlier that we couldn't get all of the data for the fuel economy. We also, there weren't many studies out there examining this type of policy. We did want to base it on the best economics, but we really couldn't find we found one or two studies that maybe touched on the elasticities of demand for new vehicles, but there wasn't really anything really solid to base this on. So we had to kind of shoot in the dark a little bit more than we'd like to have. And then the initial constraint of revenue neutrality really made a challenge too. We had to, it really limited what we could do, which cars we could raise the rates on. And it was also a challenge to approach the revenue neutrality without sort of an economic model. But and then there's also this concern that, as we raise, as the policy moves on, maybe this would actually become revenue negative, or especially since it was hard to also include that earned income tax credit carve out, that it would go revenue negative. So it was very positive when we were able to have the option of going revenue positive. And a newer issue that's come up is how do we, this came up after the regulation went into effect, is how do we assess the tax on plug-in hybrids, MPG or MPGE? There's some evidence that we should go with MPGE because plug-in hybrids are theoretically getting a better miles per gallon. But there's also been some studies, I think one out of somewhere over in the United Kingdom recently, that was showing that people aren't plugging them in as much as you'd expect. This was our final tax schedule. We kind of hinted at as I went along, we went with a squared-based formula. We went with binning because it was simpler to understand. We also maintained the weight class distinctions because, one, the legislation pointed us in that direction, and then second, the heavier vehicles are still damaging our roads more. We tried to limit the amount that the 40 mile per gallon or more vehicles increased with this new formula as well. So they're only going, regular Prius is only going to get a 1% rate, tax rate. And we did also go with a slight revenue positive to deal with some of those factors that I mentioned earlier. So it's theoretically up to a 10% revenue gain from this. So in summary, we were able to put together a reasonable, reproducible excise tax rate based on fuel economy. That was also a sort of a factor. In the future years, we'll be able to take our registration data, probably tinker with an R script, and then be able to reproduce this and have it stand up to scrutiny. And we think that we found that the square-based formula that maintained the weight bins was the most reasonable formula. There was a lot of back and forth as we went along, but that was definitely the consensus by the end. And we are kind of interested in seeing what the effects of this policy would be, and hope to find out more of it as we see this in action for the next few years. And I want to thank Thomas and Alex Lopez, who worked with me on this at DOE, in particular Alex, and then my supervisor, Dr. Rama Tangarella, and Darnell over at the DMV. And if you have any questions, there's my email.
Fantastic. Excellent presentation and very, very interesting. One question that's come up is, sort of given your experience, what might you suggest to other areas, other states that are looking at the same type of issue, given what you went through?
Well, I definitely would hope this. Well, I mean, the one thing I would like to see is some sort of comparison to see how effective what we put into place was. As I think we could make a good comparison between ourselves and maybe, let's say, Arlington, Virginia, since they're just very similar geographically. Yeah, I mean, I'd say when it comes down to it, though, I think that at least if you're going to do something, that this is an interesting approach because it's really showing that you're trying to raise money from the people that are doing the most harm when it comes to fuel economy, when it comes to greenhouse gases. Whether it moves the needle, though, we'll have to wait and see. I would expect it's probably not going to do much with air quality in general, but it probably will bump that MPG up a hair. But we'll see.
What type of, another question was the sort of outreach to the public and public response? Any pushback, or what was it understood by the public?
I was actually surprised at how little public impact. I mean, some of the enviro groups were very supportive of us doing this, obviously. But the only negative thing I've heard from the public was the person who was complaining about how their plug-in hybrid was going to be assessed, which this is fair because if you buy something that you're expecting to get 120 miles per gallon and it's getting assessed at 40 miles per gallon, that is a differential that's worth considering.
Great. Well, again, excellent presentation, and we'll still have time probably for discussion at the end. So if others have additional questions, feel free to enter those into the chat box, and we'll see where we are when we wrap up. Our second speaker is Dr. Xiaobing Li, who's a postdoc research associate at the Alabama Transportation Institute. And his presentation is on a systems approach to health pathways from community development, active travel behavior, to body mass index and health. So, Xiaobing?
Thank you, Katie. Nice to meet everyone here. It's my pleasure to present our work that is accepted for already published in the International Journal of Sustainable Transportation. So this is a work that we initiated in 2019. It's about almost 2 years. And this is a collaborative work with different various professors from different universities. I would like to acknowledge several of them, like Professor Xiaobing Li. He's a professor in the School of Social Work, who gave us a lot of comments on this paper and study. And I'm going to cover a little bit of background about BMI, and also why we were interested in this topic and how we collect the data from different sources, and how we use different kind of methodologies to look into the health issue by looking at active travel behavior, body mass index, and health conditions. And we will conclude with some key findings. So a little bit of the background. Obesity issue has been becoming more and more severe in recent years. Starting from looking at the statistics from 1985 to 2016 here, as you can see, obesity has becoming severe, especially in some of the southern states, like the place I'm currently living. Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So these states are having a lot of obesity issues. If you look at the recent graph from this, the behavior risk factor surveillance system, you were identified that there are more and more states that are identified as, a lot of over 35% of population are having obesity issues. So that's a clear trend, and in the future years, who knows what will be going to happen? But definitely, we're going to do something right now. And from a researcher's perspective, we're going to definitely look at some of the countermeasures that we can do from the transportation perspective. You can see those differences by race, by age and gender. Later on, I'm going to show more statistics of that. One of the key statistics reported by the CDC that obesity is just not a health issue, but it can cause deaths. And I'm from a transportation background. We're talking about a lot of traffic safety and transportation safety, but here we're looking at how the obesity are linked to the fatality or deaths and things like that. So as we can see, this obesity issue becomes severe in recent years. How we can do about it? We can talk about it from different aspects, and people are using drugs and different kind of medical surgeries or therapies. I think these are useful in some way. And these medical kind of called what we call medical countermeasures. But from an engineering background or from a transportation perspective, we're going to look at how different kind of active transport modes going to impact their lifestyles. Are people doing more of physical activity by walking and cycling? Instead of sitting longer hours on the sofa for watching TVs, and people are also looking at healthy diets. Are there daily diets look good by consuming like low calorie foods? So we're going to look at this in this study. Coming to the research question or problem statements, we are going to face a very big challenge here. Is that we kind of look at data from different perspectives. We call it data islands. The data are separate from each other. So like health professionals may collect the data particularly for health, for individuals' health. But for our transportation engineers or researchers, we collect the data from the transportation side. So, I mean, it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard to connect or integrate these data together, especially when in this paper, we're trying to integrate the data from a national perspective, how the data comes from different states going to be integrated together. So the big question that we're going to answer is how the community living environments, such as the walkability and air quality index, are going to affect the personal level, active transportation behaviors, and how later on they're going to impact the body mass index and their health conditions. This is a question we're going to answer in this study. Like I mentioned before, the data is a challenge, but we managed to have merge some of the distinct data sources together. One big data is, that we collected from is called HINTS. It's collected from the National Cancer Institute. So this database is pretty huge, and they're running the surveys each year. But each year they have a different goal of looking at the health issues. Particularly in this study, we're looking at the BMI, obesity issue, and other health conditions. So we're able to, by removing the missing data and other data that does not have good information, we finally collect over 16,000 samples of the data. And then we're trying to link with this data with ACS, American Community Survey, on the county level. So the American Community Survey, they have a good chunk of data too, but the thing is we have to link this with HINTS. We have to make sure they are on the same level. So we decided to use the county level as a base to link them together, similar for the data from EPA for the walkability index and the air quality index. So for the walkability index and air quality index, it's pretty straightforward. There's, I guess, a lot of people covering this topic in this symposium. It's pretty straightforward. Walkability index, if it has a higher value, it means that such a community or region has a better walking facility that people can use to walk and bike. And for the air quality index, well, it's on the opposite side. I think it's higher values means that the air quality is not good in those regions. This is a framework that we use to integrate the data. So for HINTS, ACS, walkability, and air quality index, we will put them together. And but later on, we're going to separate into different features like social demographic features, transportation features, and environmental features. So, and then we are going to use different kind of models to connect them with each other. And then later on, we're going to show more details of this one. So after integrating the data, we have the integrated health database. But if you look into the details of this, they can be separate into different levels to state, county, household, and person. And the county, as we said before, is the level that we use to integrate the data. And then we use the hierarchical levels because, as you can see, there are definitely hierarchies in this data structure for different kind of modeling purposes. We use linear, binary logic, and order logic. So because the response variables has different nature, for the, let's say, for the walkability and walking and bicycle percentage in a certain region, it's a continuous variable. For the body mass index, is we categorize them into like obese or non-obese, and then we have a category variable health conditions, poor, good, excellent health conditions. So these models are in accordance with the nature of the response variables. So one particular method that we use is called the pathway analysis. Think about it in this way: if you're looking at the health conditions, there are certain variables that can be linked to health conditions. For example, the BMI can be directly linked to the health condition, and some other kind of cancer history. These are factors that can be directly linked to the health. But if you're talking about transportation, if you're talking about walking or bicycling, how they can be linked to the final health condition? It cannot be directly linked to that, but we use pathway to kind of link to the active travel behavior, to the BMI, and then to the health condition. This is the basic idea how the pathway analysis looks like. And in the readouts, I'm going to give a little bit of the key factors. This is actually this table is a very small table, but in the paper it's really big. I'm going to show a few key variables here, like the health conditions and the BMI and the active travel mode share on the county level, and a walkability index and air quality index. These are the key variables that we particularly look at in this study. On the right side, you will see the figures of walkability index and active travel mode share in percentage. So if you're looking from top to down, particularly the District of Columbia, are ranked the highest with the walkability index, and definitely there are more people are going to use the active travel modes, such as walking and bicycling. So this is a clear association over there. But if you're looking at some other states, like maybe New Jersey or some other state, New York, the ranking is a little bit different. So, for example, New Jersey is ranked high, I guess a third on the list, but it's ranking almost in the middle of the list on the left side. So even though the infrastructure, walking and bicycling infrastructure is good in some states, but people may not use that fully. There's left issue with for the policymakers to decide, well, how we can promote or increase the active transportation behaviors. This is a big table that we use to describe the pathway analysis. We use different kind of lines to represent what are the key factors or associates that associate with three distinct what we call mediators. The first one is called active travel mode share, and then in the middle you will see the BMI, especially the obese, and then on the right side you will see the poor or fair health condition. These are the ones that we particularly look at. So this is a big table. I don't have too much time to go into details, but I want to just mention the key results from this big table. So once you have the model results, you can definitely get the marginal effects. And we built 3 models, as we mentioned. We built 3 models, and we use the pathway analysis to connect them together. For example, if you take a look at the exercise for health conditions, you will get a negative 13.92% for such a marginal effect connected with health conditions. So that means if we have more exercise every day, definitely you're going to reduce the chance of being in a state of like poor health condition. And this is intuitive, but the point we want to make it here is through the pathway analysis, such a marginal effect is going to be enlarged. So it's going from negative 13.92% to like negative 15.47%. So that means that exercise can be directly linked to the health condition, but through active travel behaviors like walking and bicycling together, it will reduce BMI and definitely reduce the chance of being in a state of poor health condition. So similar for education and household income. And then for walkability index and air quality index, we want to mention that walkability index, we have negative association 2, which means a health walkability environment is definitely going to make a positive impact by reducing the chance of staying in the poor health condition. But such a linkage is poor. It's because maybe the linkage that the integration of the data is not on the county level. So later on in future study, we may directly have to think about how we can conduct a surveys to connect in each individual's characteristics. And then definitely we see that air quality index is going to be detrimental to people's health conditions. Then it comes to the conclusion. Obesity is becoming a big issue. In not just in 1 or 2 states, it's becoming an issue in more and more states. So, which means that policymakers need to pay attention to these states. And then we talk about walkability index and air quality index. Walkability index, they're definitely going to increase people's health condition. But as we just mentioned, in some of the states, it still needs some attention that how to promote people to better use the facilities out there. And then we have some of the key results, like older adults are less likely to adopt the active transport modes. But this is findings from this study, but I'm not sure for folks that are older, do they really don't want to do this? And then regular exercise, healthier food, good sleep patterns, and education and house calm. They're definitely good indicators for having a health condition. With that, I'm going to take any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Great, excellent presentation. One question, and it may not be totally relevant, but your perspective on it would be beneficial anyways. Or the question is, are you able, would this process enable you to look at potential impacts during the pandemic? Were people more active? Were they less active? And or if those types of situations should occur in the future, would this methodology allow you to look at those types of situations?
That's a good question. Actually, last year we did a survey, especially for the residents within the state of Alabama, but we hadn't had a time to look at the data yet. But this methodology is definitely going to be useful for analyzing, how to connect the different factors, how to evaluate each people's health conditions. It's definitely going to be very useful.
Great, great, excellent. Well, again, excellent presentation, and we'll see if there are any more questions at the end in the follow-up discussion. So let's move on to our third presentation. Our third speaker is Dr. Bruce Appleyard. He is an associate professor of city planning at San Diego State University, and he'll be talking about frameworks and tools for measuring, understanding, and realizing transportation land use coordination for sustainability, livability, health, and equity. So Bruce, we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Katie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. The slides aren't up yet, so.
Yeah, I'm worried. Well, I was having some issues uploading my slides. I wonder if you can go to the next speaker until we figure this out.
Hey, Bruce, you can share your screen as well. And
Okay.
up at the top of your screen, you'll see a box that says screen, and whenever you click it, it'll start sharing your screen.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
Can everyone see my presentation?
Not yet.
Bruce, if you would like to just send me your slides, I can put them up for you.
Okay. Oh, wait, here. Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, can you see my slides now?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. So I'm going to talk about a partnership between the Transportation Cooperative Research Center and the California State Department of Transportation, which builds off of a national study of all the transit corridors and all the transit stations throughout the country that resulted in a handbook for building livable transit corridors and a livability calculator, which captures all of the access to opportunity issues around transit stations, as well as the health and equity issues as affordable housing, pedestrian collisions, health and safety. This built off of a 2009 partnership between HUD, US DOT, and EPA, which created the Partnership for Sustainable Communities and their livability principles. And there were things like provide more transportation choices, promote equitable and affordable housing. It was really access to opportunities. And really, at the end of the day, they were focusing on what we'd call smart growth. So we operationalized all these principles, the livability calculator, just slightly changing their direction so we could actually provide performance metrics, such as high quality transit walking and bicycling opportunities and equitable and affordable housing near transit. And then we operationalized this into a radar graphic that would show you if you're getting closer to the edge of the graphic, you're doing well, and if in the green areas, you're doing well. If you're in the red areas, you're performing poorly in all these different things, such as mixed income housing or transit, transit accessible economic opportunities, accessible social and government services, and so on. So really, it's all about access to opportunities and focusing on smart growth. What do we consider smart growth? And this has implications our findings are that with better smart growth, you're getting better health outcomes, better environmental outcomes, and better economic outcomes, as well as equity outcomes. So some of the measures we used were regional accessibility, or jobs accessible and by 45 minutes of transit, housing affordability, the percentage of your income going to housing, socioeconomic diversity, measure Gini coefficient measures diversity, transit service coverage, balanced transit ridership along the corridor. What are the balance of flows for the transportation corridor? And is it safe, livable, and walkable? We also looked at access to jobs, affordable housing, shopping, healthcare services, arts, and culture. We then did a place typology analysis and developed a taxonomy of transit corridors and stations. And the lowest performing corridors and stations from a transportation land use perspective were the emerging stations. Transitioning stations were the middle level stations. And then integrated stations or coordinated stations that had a good mixture of access to opportunities, good land uses, accessing the transportation system. And again, we use this, our livability calculator to map out where the strengths and weaknesses were along the corridor. We found a few things. One was that in the integrated corridors and stations, we had 4 times as many transit, walking, and bicycling trips, and 50% more trips had their destinations within the corridor. So higher levels of transportation land use integration led to more travel within the corridor itself, rather than going outside of the corridor. So there were serious travel behavior benefits from having a more integrated transportation land use connection along a corridor and around the stations. I also went ahead and mapped out all of did a place typology for all the stations in the country. And this is focusing on the transportation, the light rail stations around San Diego. And we looked at again, the benefits of living near a transit station, and if that transit station was highly performing in the integrated category versus the emerging category, which are the red stations versus the green stations. So looking at the difference between the poorly performing stations and the highly performing stations in the green, you find a couple things. One is that household transportation costs are at a higher level in the higher performing station areas. And that makes sense because you're capturing some amenity value in your stations. We also found that, but in contrast to the high household costs, we found that household transport costs were much lower, savings of about $2,700 a year. We also found that median commute distances in the higher performing stations were cut by nearly 5 miles, as opposed to 10 miles. We also found that obesity rates were lower along the corridors, along the stations. 7% for the corridors, 5% for the stations. We also found that vehicle miles traveled was cut by by over 6,000 miles, with a savings of about 3 tons of carbon. So there's a real benefit to having transportation land use integration around stations and corridors. We then took this work and developed an online calculator that would show all these different measures that so they're easily accessible. And if you want to look it up, you can just go to smartmobilitycalculator.com, and it actually shows the areas. And this is the area of San Diego. Let me just come to this. It shows that the green and the blue cool areas are areas of low vehicle miles traveled. And if you hover your mouse over an area, the dashboard on the right is going to show you where things are as they move dynamically through the area. So VMT per household, per capita, carbon emissions per household, all of the cool green areas are the areas of low VMT and low greenhouse gas emissions. And these are the walkable, transit accessible and job accessible areas. So it's a good tool. Again, Smart Mobility Calculator. If you just search online, you can come up with it. We also developed a place typology for all of California, and on the horizontal axis is job accessibility, and stronger regional accessibility or location efficiency. And the upper access has strong community design. And and then these are the different place types. And urban places, suburban places, going to the upper right quadrant is really desirable. Compact communities and rural areas. Here are some maps of California and the different place types that we put down. And this helps Caltrans in their smart mobility framework, which is to help decide how you focus certain development patterns and transportation investments in certain areas. We also find that in these place types that we have lower VMT per capita. So you can see the urban areas are performing better than the suburban and rural places as you move from left to right. This is a graphic that shows how you can use the performance measures, and in the upper right, we've got a location efficiency, neighbor design, place typology, and again, moving into the upper right, it's a better place. This shows the difference between if you have high job access and low population above, then you've got you have to zone for more housing. And likewise, if you've got low job access and high population, you have to zone for more jobs. And you need to connect to these different place types that have lower VMT and GHG emissions with more transportation investments. Some of the ways that the Smart Growth Mobility Calculator can be used are to for the new Senate Bill 743, which uses vehicle miles traveled instead of congestion level of service measures. And we can see in the sort of red areas, high VMT, we can see that there's adequate road space. But we need to think about the areas that are better concentrated, might have more traffic, might have more congestion, but actually in the green zone with lower VMT. And that's a real game changer in how this calculator can be used. It can also be used to determine how much greenhouse gas emissions are being emitted for each type of development. And I applied this to 10,000 units in the county in the red zones, and it showed that the development for 10,000 households would lead to 100 million extra pounds of carbon per year versus building in a more transit accessible area. So in the end, we need to value the active planning. We need to create a vision. We need a framework to guide subsequent planning decisions and measure performance. And we need to stick to it, showing leadership at all levels. And we need to support our planners and make markets flourish with a good plan. And one of the good vision plans is Copenhagen's hand plan that actually shows how you develop in the corridors leading to and from the downtown area. And if I could, just if any more time, I could actually show the Smart Growth calculator.
I think we lost you, Bruce.
Yeah, Katie, I think that something happened with Bruce. We can move on to the next one until he pops
Returns.
back.
Okay. So let's move on to our final speaker, Jatish Patel, who's the founder and CEO of Flow Labs, and he'll be talking about software eats the world, a no added hardware connected vehicle data-driven approach to automating signal timing. Great title.
Thanks, Katie. We wanted it to be catchy and concise. That's what we went for here. Great. So yeah, that's our presentation title. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I'm sure over the next few slides, you'll start to get an understanding of what it actually means in a very, very simple and clear way. I'm Jatish Patel. I'm the founder and CEO of Flow Labs. We're an Oakland, California-based AI and software company. We're a 10-person team focusing on solutions for transportation management. Primarily, we provide software solutions that enable to make roads cleaner, clearer, and safer for citizens and for transportation agencies. Primarily, what we're going to be talking about in this presentation is about how do we build these types of solutions. I'm talking about our pioneering work with Utah Department of Transportation, and how do we scale and affordably scale these types of impactful solutions and generate these benefits at huge scale just with software. So the problem that we've been focused and dedicating ourselves to is traffic signals. Traffic signals are the biggest lever for transportation agencies to manage vehicle flows in their networks, but today that lever is broken. The process of updating signal timings is incredibly labor intensive. It takes up to 70 hours of labor time per intersection per update. Because of this, it can be done very infrequently, typically on a 5-year cadence. And even when it is done, the process can be often incorrect and requires a huge amount of fine tuning and huge amounts of visits to the field to observe and to refine timing plans. For the last 30 years, a lot of the answer to this has been greater automation through use of technologies like adaptive traffic signal control. Now, over the last 30 years in the US, this has not been a successful approach. Over the 350,000 plus signalized intersections in the US, less than 1% do currently use adaptive technologies. And some of the main reasons why these hardware-based technologies have struggled to gain traction is, one, they're very, very high cost. We've seen costs of upfront investment for these types of technologies all the way up to $230,000 per intersection, and even the cheapest ones today are still in the decent 5-figure range. Again, the performance has been relatively inconsistent, especially in highly saturated environments, as well as large, complex grid networks. And also, these real-time technologies often entail very substantial monitoring costs. So even when they automate some labor, they then have to deploy that labor just purely for monitoring and maintenance. So at Flow Labs, what we've focused on is developing an alternative approach to signal optimization and signal timing. And we call this approach predictive traffic control. Whereas previously adaptive traffic control has been very hardware focused, predictive traffic control is a zero added hardware approach, very software and data centric. Instead of using hard coded embedded algorithms, we leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning for continuous learning and refinement of the optimizations. Instead of being reactive and backwards looking, predictive is, well, predictive, anticipating future conditions and optimizing for them. Additionally, adaptive control solutions have typically been very local optimization focused, whereas predictive is much more network level focused. And that brings us on to the title of this presentation. Software is eating the world is a very kind of common phrase that was taken by Mark Andreessen, famous, the founder of Netscape and the modern internet browser, and a venture capitalist out in Silicon Valley. And the real concept behind this phrase was to emote the idea that software-based systems were ripe to disrupt a variety of different industries and have a really beneficial impact to be able to generate better performance at lower cost and at greater scale than has ever been done before. And at Flow Labs, that's what we're building in transportation. Some of the trends that have been supporting these new software-based approaches, I'm sure everyone here has seen various different graphs of Moore's law. The primary driver is that compute costs are coming down pretty dramatically. The second one is that alongside that, data is growing exponentially. Not only are there more IoT devices on roadsides, including inductive loops, including radar, LiDAR, Bluetooth sensors, etc. There's also significant amounts of data coming from connected vehicles and connected devices, GPS devices, smartphones. All of that provides a new, rich, low-cost data set that is rife for insight. Alongside this, AI has been improving pretty dramatically. This is from OpenAI. This is a graph of algorithmic efficiency and the exponential improvements that there have been in algorithmic efficiency, 44x improvements only in the last 8 years. What this means is that a lot of optimizations that were seen as infeasible just 10 years ago are now incredibly effective, incredibly cost effective, and certainly possible today. All of this means is that even though we've seen waves of AI come in the past since the 60s that have come and gone and created false promises, the underlying infrastructure behind this new wave of AI it means that it's here to stay. And there is a huge amount of potential for AI solutions, especially in a data-rich, complex problem like transportation. So I'll bring you on to how we use AI in our solution. This is the overall architecture that we've focused on deploying with Utah Department of Transportation. We call it predictive traffic control. And in simple terms, what we do is we pull in data from a variety of different sources. Vehicle probes, so connected devices like GPS devices, smartphones, and connected vehicles. We also pull in data from field controllers, as well as associated roadside detection units. We then use that information and process that information in our cloud, and then output optimized signal timing plans that go directly into controllers securely and safely. Typically, we update signal timings on an up to monthly basis. So a lot of the hard work really goes inside that cloud, and we're just going to open up that black box for you here. We have a multi-stage process on how we use the variety of different data that exists. A lot of the bulk of the work happens in data processing. One of the biggest issues that exists in the industry is the real lack of a source of truth in terms of data, which means that a lot of people have to go out into the field for observation. We pull in a vast amount of different data sources, but even those data sources can often be unreliable. There's been a big focus on expanding the use of roadside detection. But one of the big problems we've seen has been that roadside detection has often been highly inaccurate and somewhat unreliable, meaning that you cannot be fully dependent on that. Just to give you a sense, the modeling and processing that we've been doing has enabled us to actually ascertain the reliability of some of these detection units. This is an actual example of some of the detectors on one of Utah's major corridors. The gray bars are the detector counts that come from their detectors, and then the red is from the Flow Labs models, which combine both detection data as well as connected device and vehicle data. As you can see, there are a number of detectors which are providing erroneous data, and what our processing enables us to do is to clean and correct for that data. Just to give you a sense of scale of what we found, typically manufacturers have been talking about a plus or minus 10% accuracy rating when it comes to vehicle counts for their detection units. We've actually found that only 25% of detectors actually fit within that range. We found 25% plus 90% out, and then the median typically is around 31% in terms of volume inaccuracy. So a lot of it in terms of using machine learning and artificial intelligence is the same old cliche, garbage in, garbage out. We then move into the modeling phase, where we use all that information to accurately model traffic patterns using a variety of different techniques and neural networks to support vector machines, as well as optimization using simulation-based approaches, heuristic-based approaches, evolutionary strategies, and deep reinforcement learning. In terms of the output, we focus on generating optimized timing plans alongside accurate performance predictions, and also monitoring and analysis of performance. And that monitoring and analysis creates a feedback loop, which then enables the algorithms to constantly learn over time and through experience. This is what a typical user would see. We have a very intuitive software interface, simple setup. So the entire system is designed to be plug and play, to interoperate with existing hardware, regardless of type. It is easy to set up in just a few clicks. One of the things that we have definitely seen a big problem with in typical uses of AI is that it can often be a black box that transportation engineers do not have control over it. So what we allow is actually enabling transportation engineers to set guardrails in terms of safety, as well as set the objectives for the algorithms. So once those constraints are set and those objectives are set and the networks are set up, then the AI will generate new timing plans within seconds and provide accurate performance predictions of how they will perform in the field. Once deployed, we will then continuously measure performance at the environmental metrics, so fuel consumption, vehicle emissions, mobility metrics, including route-by-route travel time, operational metrics such as split failures, arrivals on green, and other network travel times. And that enables us to accurately measure impact and the ROI of projects. So this is the overall technology base, and we're just going to come on to how it's actually performed out in the field. We've been working on a major project with Utah Department of Transportation over the last 18 months. This has involved the deployment of the technology across 48 signals around the Salt Lake City area. It's a very high-scale deployment covering both urban and arterial environments. We've been focusing on signal optimization and performance measurement with UDOT. Just to give you a sample, this is only a very small subset of the results. We're actually doing a major public release of the full results in 6 weeks' time at the end of the project, at the end of June. We can only show you a small subsample. No one's seen these before, but this is just the data we're about to show you is we've launched 3 different generations of AI algorithms, each kind of improving on the previous. And these are the results from the latest algorithms. And this is just one timing plan. So it doesn't take into account the accumulated benefit across the entire project, which is significantly larger. So in terms of travel time, this is a sample of some of the networks and what we've seen. Reductions in travel time of up to 10%. And these are during the peak periods. So one of the things which the AI predictive traffic control has been able to do is offer superior performance in peak conditions, which is something where adaptive technologies of the past have really struggled. We've seen reductions in travel time of up to 10% and some modest reductions in off-peak periods as well. In addition, also been demonstrating dramatic improvements in vehicle progression, so improvements in arrivals on green, both at small networks and large networks. These are all network level statistics. And what we've also seen here is a dramatic reduction in stops and very, very steep improvements in progression. So in terms of stops, we've seen reductions of up to 25% reductions in stops. Other data, which we haven't been able to show here, we've seen reductions in peak period split failures of up to 35%, reductions in control delay of over 20%. And with this latest generation of algorithms, we're very excited about. We've made a lot of new improvements in there. And the real big developments of this latest suite of algorithms is consistent performance improvements across all metrics, across all networks, and across all time periods. So not only is this approach generating substantial benefits, it's generating those benefits consistently, which is hugely important in this area. We've also seen major improvements during peak and high volume periods, a 95% reduction in optimization costs, so improvement in optimization efficiency, and as well able to provide explanation of timing plan changes. So this is not just about providing strong technology, but also we've been collaborating well with Utah Department of Transportation to enable a better interface between the technology and the users and greater understanding. Some of these approaches we've found have probably been a little bit too advanced for some engineers, and a lot of what we've been focusing on is how to make the technology more accessible. So overall, in terms of operational outcomes for Utah, they've been able to fully automate the signal timing process and instantaneously update their signal timing plans. They can update their timing plans up to 60 times more frequently. They can reduce their time in the field and reduce their own carbon footprint of their teams, accurately predict performance and measure performance, and as well, rapid affordability and scalability. And that's really the key of where software really comes into its own. This is just a scope of, in terms of the overall project and where we're actually moving towards. We've scaled up from 5 intersections to 48 intersections in less than 12 months, and we'll be using the next 18 months to actually scale up to all 1,270 intersections in the state. And this is the power of software. It offers scalable and affordable impact. And this is just a sense of where this can go in terms of, from an environmental perspective. We're already seeing overall results: 20% reductions in vehicle emissions, 9% reduction in fuel consumption, up to 24% reductions in travel time, reduced queuing and delays, reductions in accident and greater safety. All of this has a dramatic benefit of up to $390,000 per intersection, which has a dramatic benefit nationwide. So overall, predictive traffic control is a new approach that offers affordable and scalable impact in smart signaling that can benefit a variety of different metrics. So if anyone's had any questions, feel free to contact me. We will be doing a broader public release of all of the data for people who want to see more details. But please feel free to contact me at jatish@flowlabs.ai. Thank you.
Great presentation. And let me ask one question that's come in, sort of public reaction, maybe. What did the DOT do in terms of letting the public know what was going on? And then has there been any public reaction so far? Or just response, I guess, might be a better way to say than reaction. And then I'll circle back, and we have a few minutes. Let every one of the other speakers just make any final comment or closing comment that they'd like.
Sure. So to answer that question in terms of the public-facing side of it, this has been a pretty stealthy project that we've been conducting. A lot of it has really been more about how can we avoid impact to consumers or negative impact to consumers, minimizing complaints in these time plan transitions. What we've seen overall is a reduction in the rates of complaints about signal timing behavior, and we've actually I'm sure many transportation professionals will probably find this rare, but we've actually received positive feedback from citizens. The citizens actually calling and saying that a lot of their commute problems have been better down certain corridors. So that's been great. And in terms of interfacing with smartphone apps, variable message signs, and work zone alerts, right now we are not interfacing with those. In terms of smartphone apps, we primarily use data aggregators to ingest data from a variety of those apps, and we pull that in and process that anonymized data, and we use as many different sources as we can. Good.
You're right. You don't often get compliments on making things better, so that's a very good sign. Again, excellent presentations by everyone. Maybe just circle back and ask Bruce, Josh, and Xiaobing, if you had any final comments you'd like to make as we wrap up and give people a short break before the start of the next session.
I think I have one question for Joseph.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in one of the slides. I remember that you're showing that the MPGs, right? I guess it's slide 5 or something. You're listing a lot of MPG values, which goes up to like 100, 150, something like that. So is this real, or just a fake values?
I mean, they are probably plug-in. There's a handful of plug-in hybrids that just skew the distribution at this point. So, yeah, it's it's 190 mile per gallon vehicle to 100 mile per gallon vehicles. I mean, I'm kind of making those numbers up off the top of my head, but that's like what the distribution looks like. Yeah, it's just there's a handful of people that bought plug-in hybrids over the last few years that skews the results.
Thank you. And one more thing is about the pure electric vehicles. You're talking about some kind of MPGE, which means, does that relate to the pure electric vehicles or other types of vehicles?
I'm sorry, I think you were breaking up a little bit, or I was.
Yeah, I'm asking the MPGE, this kind of term, does that relate to the pure electric vehicles or other types of vehicles?
I mean, theoretically, the calculations would relate to both, but if it's a pure electric vehicle, it's exempted, so we didn't care as much about that. So it'd be the plug-in hybrids.
Okay.
Solely that we, as I said, it's that disconnect, because if you run the plug-in hybrid but never plug it in, you're going to get real, just kind of crummy gas mileage compared to if you're, in a regular vehicle. Whereas if you're plugging it in, you can get 120 miles to the gallon. So.
All right, thanks.
Great. Any final comments from any of the panelists?
Katie, I need to ask, did my presentation come through, most of it?
Yes, yeah. You broke up right at the very, very end, but no, the rest of it worked fine.
Oh, good. Well, thank you all for.
If there was anything at the end that, again, a closing comment you wanted to make that might have gotten cut off, please feel free to make it now. We've got 3 minutes before we conclude.
Sure. Just go to Smart Mobility Calculator on the web, and you can look at the tool.
Okay.
And thanks to my researchers and my colleagues and collaborators.
Great. Well, again, thank you all very, very much. I think an excellent session. 15-minute break now. The next breakout sessions start at noon Central Time. So again, thank you all very, very much, and I look forward to future interactions.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Katie.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, y'all.